So, good evening, everyone in Bangalore and in India. Good afternoon in Europe. Good morning in the States or in Latin America. Welcome, everyone, and we'll wait for a few seconds, few minutes for having all of you joining us. So get your drink ready, because for some of you it's a happy hour. For us in Europe, it will be happy espresso. We need some coffee.
We do.
So Design Open is having its digital virtual series with Design Open Happy. And we'll spend 1 hour together with our guest speaker, who's zooming in from London. Stay tuned.
Maybe we need to ask the participants what is it that they would much rather be drinking and where would they want to be drinking it?
Yeah, we could have that while all of you are joining us. So, Sonia, what are you drinking?
I'm having coconut water with a bit of a touch of honey and some mint, and it's fabulous like that.
Great. I'm having some sparkling water, and we are going to discover what our guest speaker, Parminder Vir, is having in a few seconds. So allow me to quickly introduce Design Open Happy. Welcome, everyone, and Design Open is zooming in from Bangalore, and thanks to all the team of Spread for having organized everything. So my name is Alok Nandi, and I'll be co-hosting this with Sonia Manchanda, who's in Bangalore. And Design Open Happy is a 1 hour conversation taking place every 15 days. And you are joining us for Design Open Happy number 3. So we had previously Thomas Garvey and then Deepa Prahalad, and you can watch their interventions on designopen.in/happy. The videos are uploaded, and this one will be uploaded in a few days. So see Design Open Happy as a kind of spin-off of Design Open, which was a series of events launched in Bangalore and then traveling in India. And Sonia will give us more insights on that in a few seconds. Design Open Happy is structured in 1 hour of conversation. 1 or 2 speakers are coming in and are giving their point of view, their parcours. And based on that, we are trying to understand what's the temperature of the planet, if I may say so. And so far, our speaker in London is suffering of a very high temperature in terms of temperature of the planet, but she'll tell us more. And Sonia, tell us more about Design Open so people get a sense of where we are coming from.
Yeah. So basically, Alok, Parminder, what happens with design is that it's usually considered a closed sort of space. It's where creation is happening, and it's a closed box. But the biggest opportunity and challenge of design that it's open and it can be applied across disciplines. So we created Design Open as a format to be able to invite in people who are creating what's next, to then decode shifts, map emergence as things are happening. So it's very raw. Its insights emerge as people speak to each other. So it's not fully shaped ideas that are there yet, but you jump in early, you catch the ideas sooner. You catch on to the shift sooner. So really Design Open was designed like that. So we had, we hosted it at Design Barn, which is our facility. We've hosted it in other cities. We've had 8,000 participants, workshops, speakers. We've gone across 3 cities. We've hosted it with Microsoft, in Kochi, along with the Design Week. And all of them have been tremendous sessions. And what's happened is, you know, with these 50 speakers who come from diverse backgrounds, in their own ways contribute to design, innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship, we have formed a sort of community where it's all right to share raw ideas, it's all right to talk about the future, and it's important, in fact, to be able to match this. So that's why it's only natural that we move on to the digital space when we cannot meet physically, and we keep the community intact and grow it, and in fact go global and not be restricted by geography. So that's really the background of Design Open. And what's exciting today is that we have Parminder, who, because I don't want to, she's given us her time and I want her on screen very, very fast, because it's quite a privilege to have someone like her in our midst. She was involved with the Tony Elumelu Foundation as the CEO, and between 2014 and 2019, in 5 years, she's worked across the continent, seeding entrepreneurship. And I've watched it before. I've actually watched it emerge. So I've seen how there have been some 10,000 entrepreneurs, and and along with that, there have been across 53 countries and there's been this entire shift and a change that has happened there. And interestingly, she has a background in media and television, and she's been involved with BBC. She's even funded Oscar-winning series, and there's a very interesting background to then go into entrepreneurship and won several awards. And as a matter of fact, I mean, amongst the awards she has won is the Order of British Empire. So I don't know exactly, but I think it means the equivalent of, or it is being knighted. So somebody very highly qualified with a very deep experience, from whom we want to get these really deep insights. So I'm going to, with that introduction, I'm also going to ask her my first real question here, which is based on the last conversation we had with Parminder. I thought, let's launch into this, where maybe now we need to shift the narrative, create some ripples in the narrative. Too long we've had a narrative. Maybe it's time to shift it a little bit. Is there an opportunity to, in this time of crisis, and I'm calling it credo, crisis, resilience, entrepreneurship, dreams and opportunities, do we need a new credo? Do we need a new creed? Do we need a new way of looking at things? And maybe there's something we can learn from these entrepreneurs in Africa and their resilience and their way of creating value. So with that, I hand it over to Parminder, and I want to hear her reflections.
Wow, what an introduction. Firstly, I want to say a very big thank you to you, Sonia, for being my, a guide, and for following and encouraging me as I made the crazy transition from film to philanthropy to going to work in Africa in 2014. You followed my journey and you commented on the amazing achievements that we did achieve in the foundation, and the foundation continues to achieve. The program was a 10-year program. My job had been to literally come into the foundation at the invitation of the founder, Tony Elumelu, to help him operationalize his vision. His vision was that I want to empower 10,000 entrepreneurs from 54 African countries over the next 10 years with a commitment of $100 million of my own private wealth, unheard of across the African continent and probably even in the Indian continent. But it was, you could see that in 2014, the Africa Rising story was really taking hold, and the government and the private sectors were beginning to see the enormous opportunities of unleashing the African SMEs. And I had the privilege and an honor. In effect, it was a call to destiny, for someone who'd spent 30 years making films in the UK, trying to bring about change in the UK in terms of, representation, fair representation in terms of Black, Asian-centric stories. It was as if everything I had done until then was preparing me for this big job or for this big opportunity. And that's what led me to say within very, few days of meeting the team and meeting Mr. Elumelu, that yes, I would leave the comfort zone of my home in London and I would locate to Lagos and then begin to imagine creating and designing a program that would be made in Africa by an African for Africans. So I'm really honored and touched to be part of your design, open, happy, and to see and to share really in this time that we have together, the African stories of resilience, the African stories of innovation, of creativity, as I traveled across the continent and met thousands of African entrepreneurs across many, many sectors, young African entrepreneurs, the oldpreneurs as well as women business owners.
So you said something about preparing, and I think it's very interesting because even as we face this moment, are we prepared? We were just discussing earlier about heat in London and being prepared, about for heating and for seating and all of those issues. Can you ever be adequately prepared? Can you build on that, what you were saying? Because we keep learning and we keep going not just in one direction, maybe as creative leaders, but multiple directions. Does that prepare us better? Is the world prepared for what's happening? How can we better prepare? What can we learn from the African story?
I think I'm not sure about, they always say the preparedness meets opportunities. So I think, absolutely, certainly the best entrepreneurs, those who are the most successful, whether you're, as I did, I was an entrepreneur, or I continue to be in the media and the creative industries. It was always the preparation. You can't just go and shoot a film. There's an enormous amount of preparation. Just like your organization, you have the concept, for the idea of bringing, I remember you saying design entrepreneurs and creating a meeting place for them, a space where design entrepreneurs can meet. But it didn't just happen. There was a lot of preparation that went into it. Were we prepared for this? I don't think I was prepared in my lifetime for a pandemic. No. We've heard stories of pandemics. Now the Spanish flu, the plagues, all those stories are being rehearsed for us. But were we prepared? No. When I was in Lagos in 2015, the whole of West Africa and a lot of other African countries were hit by Ebola. I noticed a lot of expats started to leave. And they said, you should really prepare to leave. And I said, no, there are 200 million people in Nigeria who don't have the option of leaving. I want to see how well prepared this country is going to be to manage this Ebola crisis. And to my amazement, Nigeria, Liberia, and Ghana and other countries managed to contain the virus. And they were containing it long before the West woke up to its potential danger, only when some of those Ebola-carrying people arrived on their shores. So I think it's challenged. It's a much, much bigger, is shown or is exposed. All the things that are not right with our everyday existence, the normal as we call it. We know the health systems across the world are not functioning. Why is it that Africa had to depend, thank you to Jack Ma for giving them the masks, but why is it that we had all outsourced the production of those basic equipment, like masks, like those health, the protection gears, to a place manufacturing hub in China, right? And when I knew that there were many, many entrepreneurs who had seen these gaps in the manufacturing supply chain and had actually proposed business ideas, and many of them had been selected through the foundation. I remember this one young girl based in Ghana said her business was literally making masks, making gloves, making those coats that you wear in hospitals. I met her in 2018. I said, oh, wow, this is amazing. So what's your challenge? And her challenge then was to convince local hospitals to buy from her rather than have the stuff sent from Africa. I know for a fact that during the coronavirus, suddenly she becomes, and her business becomes very, very significant, yeah? And, you know, other examples of ICT, you know, for a long time, African businesses, you know, big businesses, small businesses, governments would be outsourcing their ICT requirements to people, inevitably India, of course, but China and other parts, when in fact they have some of the most talented software developers. So I think what this, you know, that, you know, I mean, I think what is exposed that yes, parts of the African continent, the health sector, the education sector, many sectors were not prepared. But what is also exposed in a good way is that the talent to be able to fill those gaps is there in Africa across the continent. And it is now up to government, the policymakers, the donor agencies, all of those people to say, stop, you know what, it's time to bring back some of those supply chains home. And we've seen that across, you know, through our, you know, one of the things we launched through the Support for Africa SMEs, which was literally a hashtag I started in 1st of April, was the Africa Farmers Stories. And those are, and incredible how the health workers across the world have kept us safe, but it's actually the farmers that have kept us fed.
Basically, there is this global, local, and then there's policy. So
Local policy, yeah.
Those are the dots we need to connect, because maybe now it's a great time for, you know, the right policy changes. And with that, Alok, maybe you can, since you yourself belong to many places, as much as Parminder does, maybe you can connect the dots between all those places.
Yeah, Parminder, it's great to hear your stories building in Africa, but what is also fascinating is that you have been traveling throughout the continent with a pair of eyes which were coming from India and which spent sometimes in the UK. So you have this kind of agnostic views, I would assume, on different systems. And filmmaking and film producing, how did it push into that? Before we connect some dots, I'm very curious about that power of storytelling, if I may say so.
I think, you know, one of the things I've always, you know, whenever I meet people, the first thing I want to do is to download their story and I'm very good at downloading people's stories. It's a skill that I learned as my first job in the BBC as a researcher. So people's stories fascinate me and connect me so that I don't, you know, impose. I don't come with preconceived ideas of what I think is right. The easiest thing for me to have done when I arrived at the Tony Elumelu Foundation was to literally parachute business development, entrepreneurship development programs or models from India. I could have done that. Could have done it from the UK, Europe, and US. But for me, it was really important to understand the reality of what is it to be an entrepreneur in real terms across the African continent with no consistency of power, no internet, yeah, no enabling environment which is very patchy. There are 54 countries with each with its own systems, yeah. In terms of financing, you know, financing and, you know, all kinds of regulatory obstacles that are thrown in front of the entrepreneur. And so for me, it was about trying to understand that fire in the belly of the African entrepreneur. What is it, despite all of these obstacles, you know, if you wake up in the morning and think, these are all the reasons why I shouldn't be an entrepreneur, you still think, you know what, I have a business idea. I have a dream to be able to create this product or service, take it to market, because I know within my own community, within my own city, within my own country, there is a huge market for it. And yes, and then there are 53 other African countries who might also buy my product. Yeah. So I think it's a sense of, I don't know, humility that there is a lot that I brought to the UK, when I left India. I always say that I came with a suitcase full of culture, a history, a language, music, everything, that I didn't come empty-handed, that I wanted to share with my newfound home. And similarly, when, as I traveled across the African continent, I could see connections and how entrepreneurship and how African SMEs, never mind the policies of the intra-Africa trade, that they were the ones who were going to connect Africa because they are solution providers.
Now, if we want to look back in your journey and say, what are the elements of that fire in the belly that we could share to Indian entrepreneur and European entrepreneur? Because, I'm born in Congo. I'm born in Africa. I have spent 17 years there. And what we see is often the flows of stories coming from the Northwest towards Africa. And I think, as Sonia, you are mentioning, we are in a sweet spot where we need to look at stories who are inspiring from Africa to elsewhere. What would be some of those that you think we could share with the audience coming from India, Europe, US?
So, as an entrepreneur, I was really formed and shaped in the UK, and we are very mollycoddled. We are very supported, in the creative industries and other sectors as well. We know that we can go to our local governments, central governments, regional governments. We can go to governments. We can even go to the private sector for funding, for support. Whereas in India and to a greater extent, and to an even greater extent in Africa, the 3 Fs, family, fools, and friends, are the ones that you turn to first. I mean, that's what, we as filmmakers used to talk about, the 3 Fs, but across the African continent, that first $500, $1,000, $5,000 to really get people to buy into your mission vision for a product or service, it is the 3 Fs, But the commonalities, I think, are much greater between the African entrepreneurs and the Indian entrepreneurs in terms of the can-do attitude. That's number one. Number two, that there is a huge local, regional, Pan-African market. India is a subcontinent with a similar sized population to the entire African continent. So there is a phenomenal local consumer. And I really say to people, don't worry about, selling your products to Americans, Europeans, and the UK, and trying to, I don't know, it's almost like jumping through those, the obstacles of regulation. Sell your products locally and sell it regionally and sell it across Pan-Africa. I think in the African continent, what really struck me talking to young entrepreneurs, and remember, the demographic of Africa is young. 80 to 85% of its population is the median age of 19. You know where the next innovation is going to come from. You know where the next creativity is going to come from. It's going to come from Africa. You know where the next human capital, the talent pool, is going to come from. It's going to come from Africa. So there's this openness to try, not to be scared about failing on the first attempt, but to try and try again, to be open to pivoting, as many of the businesses we've seen through this crisis have done. I think it's the love for the African continent. For too long, they recognize that Africa has been an extractive continent. People have taken from Africa, right? And what I found really, really, I don't know, just beautiful and encouraging was how young Africans see that it's about investing in Africa, despite all of the challenges. I think certainly, to give credit to the government leaders, there is the attempts to stabilize countries. You come from Congo, it has one of the most craziest track records of instability, but I know many entrepreneurs in Congo who are really doing well, And similarly, you know that before COVID, I think 7 of the world's largest economies, performing economies, were coming out of Africa, including Ethiopia. Who would have thought the 1980s Ethiopia to today? Even a country as like Central Africa Republic, like Congo, are doing things which are in the interest of their people.
So could we say that the creative confidence is back on stage? Because what we could argue is that 30, 40 years ago, they were put in a position where their creative confidence was hurt. And today we see people who are proud to be African, and you know the story of Africa with a K and not Africa with a C. So I was with a designer from Kenya who was practicing in South Africa, and he says that we are Africa with a K, and K for knowledge, K for that. And that is what I'm hearing also from you.
No. No, okay, no. I mean, no, totally. You know, one of the things that really, you know, before when I came back to the UK, so one of the biggest, create forces in Africa is its music, is its filmmaking, is the creative industries across the African continent. And one of the things I've seen emerging even in the UK is how the talent of African descent is in the forefront. Stormzy is of Ghanaian origin, right? Many of our Oscar-winning actors in the UK come from many of those parts of Africa, or descendants from Ghana, from Nigeria. So I think it's knowledge, I think it's imagination, I think it's the can-do, I think it's taking control back in terms of developing Africa for Africans by Africans. One of the things that I observed again while I was traveled across the continent is, why is there so much capital flight out of Africa that sustains the US, UK, European education sector, that supports and sustains India's health sector? I mean, the number of Africans who are now coming to India for healthcare, when in fact, if you look at when you ask the young Africans, what did your parents want you to be? It was exactly the same as the Indians: accountant, doctor, lawyer, engineer, yeah? Exactly the same. And I said, what, did you think about being a painter, a musician? Yeah, but only after I've got those degrees first, yeah? I said, oh my God, this is exactly parallels the India until, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, just over a decade ago. India also embraced entrepreneurship as cool and sexy. That parents thought, you know what, yeah, we can allow our children to innovate, to create, to imagine, to fail as entrepreneurs and succeed, because we can see, the products and solutions that some of those the successful entrepreneurs have bought. They're not, they're really like things that people need in everyday life, yeah? So I think seeing some of those success stories come out of certainly the Indian continent, it just provides another set of role models to be able to look at, whether you're a social entrepreneur or whether you are a for-profit entrepreneur.
It's good you're enlarging this notion of entrepreneurship to social and business, right? Because people have got that bad habit of thinking entrepreneurs is only kind of Silicon Valley wala, if I may say so. So we need to break that pattern.
No, absolutely. And right now it's the digital transformation. I remember once meeting this young woman, actually she was a middle-aged woman. She had applied and got selected for the program. And I said, what's your business? She said, it's processing spice. I said, fantastic. She said, but I have a problem, which is I don't think I'm going to be able to do the 12-week program, which was literally you downloaded modules on a weekly basis. You applied them offline to your business. And you came back and you discussed your findings with your mentor. And I said, but how did you manage to apply? She said, I got my friend to help me fill out my online application. I said, well, you have 3 options, 3 choices. One is that you get your friend to come and work with you as you go through your 12-week training program and leading to a business plan. You learn the digital skills, or you give up on the program. And 6 months later, I met her again. There she was giving me her product. I said, so what happened? She said, I learned, and I also got my friend to teach me and to work with me as my digital support person. And now I sell my spices online. I mean, you know, certainly what this virus has done, certainly for the African continent, is that you've literally got to accelerate digital transformation of the continent and make it so that it is democratized. That it's not the urban elite who just have access to the internet, because everybody in rural Africa has a mobile. There's a lot that you can do with the mobile technology. And it's really put the ICT and the software developers, African software developers, center stage. And it's putting pressure on the government, or not a pressure, but a call to the government that it must now build those infrastructures. It must invest in those infrastructures, because clearly the last 3-4 months has shown how dependent, how important it is that we digitize Africa.
That's great.
Entrepreneurs are the solutions to that digitization process.
Yeah, that's great, because Sonia, one interesting insight, if I have to look into Parminder's example and India and Europe, one of the pain in Europe is the cost of telecom. I don't know in the UK, but in Belgium, it's 46% more expensive than any other country in Europe. And that is breaking entrepreneur desire to get access to infrastructure. And in India, it's very cheap. In Africa, I don't know, maybe Parminder can tell us more. So these are the enablers we need to dig into.
Yeah, actually, what I was interested in asking more about was, you know, this whole idea of the new narrative. Sometimes this narrative is in our head. For instance, when you say Africa with a K, you know, it's a narrative you're building where that Africa is about knowledge. You know, I've had an entrepreneur who came down from Africa just to meet us because he felt that he wouldn't, come down from America. He was an African, and he said that, you know, people are not going to believe that I can be a good entrepreneur there, so I came to meet you guys. So it's this narrative where there are these people who are young, so there is human capital, they're 19, 20 years old. They are risk takers, they are bold, they are creative, they're soulful, they have music and rhythm in them, they're connected to the earth. You know, there is just so much possible in this moment. We've seen in our work, for instance, we've done a lot of work in the millet space where we work with the government, you know, to make sure that we reimagine the entire millet space, where for one quinoa, Karnataka has 9 different millets. So we saw entrepreneurship surge there, where there was not a single millet brand. And then as we watched it over 3 years, there were 30 or 40 millet brands. So in this moment where we are at an inflection point, you know, people who were right on the top will continue to say that there is going to be a new normal. But perhaps there's going to be no normal, only a new. So in that new, for instance, you know, the African entrepreneurs, maybe they have possibility. People are reimagining food, reimagining the way we live, what we wear, everything. In that moment, there is maybe this opportunity for a big shift and great opportunity for these young African entrepreneurs who must now look globally. Similarly for Indian entrepreneurs who must change that narrative and start taking this, you know, their space on the global stage. I once did a workshop for some Samoans, and they said, you know, we have a problem. What is the problem? Every time people look at us, they think coconuts. So we talked about it, and we said, you know, what if that were an opportunity? Every time people look at a coconut anywhere in the world, they think Samoa. You know, so maybe there's an opportunity here as we remap our world. You know, if they were to take the step and use their creative confidence to actually remap the world. There's a beautiful project at Bloomberg actually just now, which is called City Labs, where people are redrawing how cities will look, how their workspaces will look, how things change. So maybe there's an opportunity there. Maybe that informal economy, which never really depended on anyone and just went out there and did things. Even in India, we have the informal economy, which still is 80% of the economy. Maybe there are some learnings there where you don't hold on to a certain view, but you move forward. And what you're saying, Parminder, is that the stage has been set there. Do you think that there will be a radical shift, or is this something that's going to continue to happen on the sidelines, or is there going to be a radical shift towards entrepreneurs from India, Africa, who are going to, in the next wave of remapping our planet and the way we live, work, and do things, that they will play a significant role?
I think it's really important to, it's not, if you're thinking about, being an entrepreneur, for me, it was, what were the goals? What was the impact that we were looking for in terms of the foundations program, but other accelerator programs? It's literally job creation and revenue generation. That it was important for African entrepreneurs to imagine and dream that you could have a product and service where you had a paying customer or a client from within your own identifiable market. Yeah? I think for me, so there is those necessity entrepreneurs, which are partly in the so-called informal or not the formalized sector. Then there are those dynamic and high growth entrepreneurs. Yeah. So I know that each of those, clusters they have different needs and they have different ambitions. Yeah. So I have no problem with an entrepreneur in the kind of the high growth sector really wants to conquer the world market with their product or service. I.e., I am the next, I don't know, Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or whatever. Yeah. But I think, yes, and they do create the most jobs. Yeah. But, remember, 80% of the African economy is in the hands of the informal sector. So I think the biggest, and I think from now going forward with this COVID, we have to think about opportunities from this virus and not the problems from this virus. Yeah. So the health sector and the revamping of the health sector from top to bottom, left to right, is a huge opportunity for African entrepreneurs. The agriculture sector across the African continent. I mean, the African continent, 60% of the cultivable arable land of the world is to be found in Africa. Who is going to feed the world? It's Africa, right? The ICT, the education, the manufacturing, it's time to bring back those supply chains. I used to go and try and buy local cashew nuts in Nigeria. Nigeria produces phenomenal amount of cashew nuts. Could I do that? No. I'd have to buy polished cashew nuts that had been imported from outside. Why? Because the supply chain is broken. Yeah. It's not that the Africans don't have the skills or the knowledge and the techniques with which to do it. It's just that it's convenience. It was easier to sell raw material and then buy it back at high prices. I think that new normal, that has to change. That is absolutely will be broken. Yeah. There are many others. I think there will be a refocusing on the urban poor and the rural poor. I think design centers like your own design center. It's really how do you now extend that knowledge and take it into the rural communities. I remember one entrepreneur who's a drone entrepreneur. He said he took his drones. He wanted to use drone technology for farmers. He took his drone to demonstrate it to the farmers. And the farmers, the elders met in a village, and after they finished, they said, okay, show us what you've got. And he took them outside and he operated the drone and he watched it take off. And he felt this, tap on his shoulder, and the elder farmer said, this is incredible. This is what's going to bring my son back to the village. Yeah. So it's about taking technology, it's about taking your design thinking, it's about taking the knowledge that we have also outside of our urban comfort zones and into the rural areas, whether it's in India. So the new norm shouldn't be one of masses of people trying to come to the city, which they obviously don't want to now, thankfully, after the coronavirus. But actually, a lot of us with our knowledge, migrating and setting up amazing creative meeting spaces, but for people from within those communities, because the reality is, as I discovered, certainly across the African continent, and it's the same for me. I remember I'm a product of a rural Punjab. They were very intelligent, bright people, right? But agriculture wasn't paying, so my father migrated to the UK. Would he have done it if he'd had the choice of being able to stay and grow and feed not just his family, but also to make a profit out of it? So I think I feel certainly from engaging with African SMEs over the last 3 months, there have been horror stories, but there have been those horror stories have been one where people have learned very quickly. So they failed and they failed fast. And they've been able to reinvent, reimagine, what their business, what their community, what they themselves could be as we come through, inshallah, this coronavirus.
That's great. Before moving to the next series of conversations, allow me to remind our attendees that they can prepare questions and put that in the Q&A box there. And we'll move slowly into the interactive mode with the attendees. So you have the chat box and the Q&A box. So I see that some people are coming from Africa. That's great, listening to your stories, Parminder. I see some people also from Europe. So we are having quite a diverse audience here. And that's one of the elements we want to focus on, make sure that we break boundaries and bring many people from many areas in this space called Design Open Happy. And one of the questions I had listening to all your stories is, we talk a lot about innovation, and you talked also about the fire in the belly. And what I would like to dig into with you is, how is music helping them? Because if I remember of my childhood in Congo, the main thing I remember is the energy of music. And I was curious to hear from you. What would be your striking souvenir out of these few years, and how music relates?
One of my most, is the reason I want to go, is beautiful memories of Lagos is the music. You go to the Fela the shrine, it's called the Shrine in Lagos, and it's a shrine to Fela Kuti, and his son runs it. So, and just listening to the vibe, to the reggae, just the music, the African sound. There are a lot of extraordinary music venues. Music is a heartbeat. And that's, if entrepreneurship connects the African continent, African SMEs connect the African continent, music absolutely, without doubt, connects the African continent. Wherever you go, and it's like in India as well, and it plays constantly and consistently. And you can, a lot of the, people that I worked with would have their headphones and they would be working, and I know that they would be listening to music. And it, the musical culture and music there in the weddings, in the birthday parties, the singing and dancing, extraordinary. You can't live without it.
Yeah, that's great. Sonia,
Now, I see a very nice question here, which is, how do you see creative education evolving in the current and future scenarios, from Shashi, especially in the context of countries in Africa and in India, and how to bring in the entrepreneurial mindset into education?
how to teach entrepreneurship and how to bring it into the mindset of education. Yeah.
So how do you see? I like the way we are beginning to link creative education and entrepreneurial mindset. So basically, it's linking the two: the creative education, entrepreneurial mindset, and in the current and future scenarios in India and Africa. I think it's a brilliant question.
I think one of the, I looked at your program, the Spread Designs leadership design program. I mean, here is an example where you are bringing creativity and design into teaching leadership. Leadership is a big business opportunity, teaching leadership across the African continent, from the corporates to the business to small, medium enterprises. Yeah. So I think for me, what was beautiful reading the design of your program was you are trying to merge the lot, yeah? That is not conventional leadership, where, it's almost like kind of professional development, but it's actually really challenging your mindset and changing your mindset. And what your program, I think, is going to provide are the tools and techniques. And in fact, one of my colleagues, when I shared the information about this webinar, he said, "Oh, I'm doing a leadership." He said, "Oh, this looks really interesting. Design, open, happy. I'm going to be doing a program on design and leadership." And I said, "Well, stop. This is a program that you should think about." So I think rather than saying how, I think it's saying that you are already doing it. You are creating a kind of a playbook that hopefully that some of, you don't have to pay thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever. You can, join your program online, and then you can do it from the comfort of your home. And then you can find ways of creating like-minded communities. I certainly think there's a huge opportunity. I mean, leadership is going to be fundamentally important in the post-COVID era across the African continent, from government to policymakers to private sector leaders to the entrepreneurs themselves, yeah? But it's what kind of leadership is being taught, yeah? And I think for a long time, they've literally taken lock, stock, and barrel the kind of Western approach to teaching leadership. So I think if we can encourage and see more programs like yours shared across the continent, and that South linkage as well, absolutely amazing. Others, I believe, entrepreneurship is teachable and learnable. But for me, it's really important to design programs that speak to the realities of that entrepreneur. I don't think it's possible to parachute programs for entrepreneurs that work in the West into the African continent. I think those are programs that can come later. I think the biggest challenge is what I call the entrepreneurship support organizations across the African continent. They are challenged because a lot of their funding was coming from the outside world. But they are going to have to begin to talk, and same with the entrepreneurs themselves. They're going to have to engage and lobby and work with their local governments. And local governments need to incentivize and provide those resources so that, because the governments have their own 5-year plans. Those 5-year plans need to be implemented. Who's going to implement them? It is going to be the private sector, and within that private sector, it is going to be innovative thinkers like yourself, like the SMEs that I've met, yeah? So it's really important that whatever we are teaching in terms of entrepreneurship, that is not abstract theory. One of my fears about engaging in this conversation was, oh my God, but I know nothing about design. I haven't done an art degree, I haven't done a degree in design. What am I going to be able to say, yeah? But it's really, how is it that you take your knowledge around design and make it so that another person can adapt and adopt it for their own reality. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. It's interesting that, it's something, I got excited about the question because we've put in so many hours of effort in developing a relevant program where people are able to stretch themselves, expand their own potential and expand possibilities. Because, I mean, you need people who are not just consumers, you need creators now. And you need them at every level. You may have the talent, but if you don't have the leadership acumen, you know, in this time, you will not even be able to sort of fly along with the leader, you know. You will be questioning and you will be befuddled, and let alone be able to lead. So, in that sense, it's very reassuring that you say that leadership is the need of the hour, because it's something we felt as well, and therefore put out a program that brings together design, innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. Precisely what, like you said, you've been preparing. You know, so these are all these things you learn, but how do you apply them? You know, how do you make the opportunity to apply them? How do you even decide which is that opportunity? So for you choosing to lead the Tony Elumelu Foundation, who else could have done that? Who could have taught, who could have designed the program? You know, because it's not just entrepreneurship. Design the program, develop it, launch it, and communicate it, and make sure. You need a creative leader to be able to do that, you know.
But no, Sonia, you're a pioneer. So I think we need pioneers, right? We need leaders. I mean, the amazing thing watching your growth is that you haven't stayed in a box. In fact, you've gone on to invent new boxes. Yeah. And I think, and you know, your partnership and you're working with Alok, I mean, I listened to some of his webinars as well. So I think, and Tony Elumelu, we could have waited and said, you know what, you know, here is 9 months after, it was literally a 9-month pregnancy. We could have said, you know what, we've got this format. Now let's take it to the government and let them, you know, fund it. I think, you know, for him, it was about walking the talk. It was about, you know, the proof of concept. Yeah. It was about, you know, showing leadership rather than talking about leadership. And I'd like to think that that is what you are doing, and that is what, for me, all the African SMEs that we have been featuring through the farmer stories, through other SME stories, through the Support for Africa SMEs, you know, and through the Tony Elumelu Foundation. By the time I stepped down, we had actually empowered 9,000. That means we'd invested direct seed capital of about 25 million directly from the foundation and another 20 from partnerships. So you know, what amazed me was that 5 years later, they got it. You know, the donors, the other government leaders, you know, they could see the value of investing in African SMEs. I believe that you're a pioneer, and I believe that the program, and in fact, you guys should share the link to it, is an example of that. And I'd like to think that you might even change your program or you know, add to it by your interaction with African design leaders as well, because there's no shortage of them across the continent. And it will be a pleasure to connect you, just because you think you're a crazy thinker.
Thank you. There's another beautiful question. Sorry, Alok, you want to take that?
Yeah, is it the one, how designers can help rural community to revive their life after COVID? Is that one?
We'll fight over the question.
Oh.
I know that's question around. You already mentioned similarities in the entrepreneurship landscape between Africa and India. What kind of scope do you see in entrepreneurship in the performing arts? And what role would community building play in this? Wow. I think it's a very beautiful question.
Anurag is in the music business.
Yeah. So I see this issue with Nityagram that I'm involved with, and other such institutions that have been built. And, you know, I think entrepreneurship and community building are two very important aspects here. Parminder or Alok, any one of you, what do you think?
Alok, you take this, taking performing arts into the rural communities. You know, I think certainly, just very quickly again, we give them labels that this is performing arts. I remember one of my first exposures to theater in India was street theater, and it was protest theater. It was issue-led theater. There were a lot of women who were being burnt alive, dowry deaths, in the 80s when I first came back to India. And a lot of my friends in the performing arts took that issue and wrote plays around it and took it to the streets. So I would say, given that, COVID is saying, gathering inside a theater is going to become more and more difficult. I'd say there's a huge amount of opportunity to use performing arts, to use music, to use film, to use video as a way of showing and telling. A lot of people spend all their time telling people what to do rather than showing people. And the arts offers us the opportunity to show and not tell.
Yeah, and you're fully right. And you mentioned during the conversation the name of Fela Kuti. And Fela Kuti is a fascinating example of a musician entrepreneur who designed new infrastructure for the country and for other countries. And I think all the entrepreneurs in Africa, but also in India and in Europe, we need to learn from people like Fela Kuti and what he has done. He has created a movement, and that notion of movement is fascinating.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a platform for other musicians, emerging musicians from across the continent to be able to perform.
Yeah, and Anurag, so you should check Fela Kuti and see his work. There are some brilliant documentaries on his work. He passed away some years ago, but his son is busy pursuing the effort, and that's great. I see that we have 4 or 5 minutes left, so we need to figure out how we are going to land, because we have done such a fantastic journey with you, Parminder.
I love the movement answer, though. It really brings together entrepreneurship and the arts very, very beautifully, and community very beautifully.
Yeah. So maybe one of the insights I also get out of this conversation with Parminder and you, Sonia, is that how can we bring more performing arts in our design programs? Because Parminder, you are telling it's not only about telling, it's telling and showing, telling and performing, telling and having participation. So these are the questions we need to be busy with.
So one of the things that's really was important for me when I was at the foundation, and I continue, is for Africans to take control of their own narrative. Yeah, because the Africa that I saw was young, vibrant, ambitious, aspirational, highly educated, hardworking, and the images that I see of Africa are totally the opposite of that. Yeah. So it's important that, certainly organizations like yourself also begin to change the narrative of Africa and how Africa is perceived across the Indian continent as well.
Yeah. And there I see we are having a nice loop here, because your film background is bringing us back to the importance of narrative and how to work on that. And that's a great way of looping this conversation. We are 2-3 minutes left, and any burning point before we close this conversation, Parminder?
I think the biggest I feel I didn't really emphasize enough that the role of government post-COVID going forward is going to be fundamentally central to our lives, certainly in terms of the African continent. We have to commend how the African political leaders rose to the challenge. The African Union, the Africa Development Bank, all of these Pan-African organizations really rose to the challenge of COVID-19. My challenge to African SMEs, and I'm going to be speaking to a whole bunch of them in Bongo Hives, which is a tech hub based in Zambia. My challenge to the African SMEs is that you have to organize. You have to learn to lobby your governments. You have to go towards your government. Before, we felt that, we'd be compromising our independent status as entrepreneurs. That's absolute rubbish. We have to work with the government So African SMEs, and I hope it applies to the Indian SMEs too. You have to organize, you have to network, you have to build databases so that policies that are going to be made are not being made from the top down, but are actually co-created in collaboration with you at the table, with governments, with policymakers, and also with the international development and donor agencies. Africa is not waiting for aid. Africa is waiting for trade. African entrepreneurs don't need a hand out, they need a hand up. So buy African goods, in the way that you support, celebrities in a nonsensical manner, you follow them, follow African businesses. Support organizations like Design Open and, Spread Design. Support organizations that are really rooted in the communities and are actually doing things which are bringing about fundamental changes. So that would be my last, if I can be talking to African entrepreneurs through this platform as well. The call is that you must learn to lobby, and you must organize and make your voices heard. You must have a place on all the kind of task force that no doubt will emerge to support African SMEs. Your voice must be there. You must be represented on those task forces.
That's a fantastic way of positioning the insights here. And thanks, Parminder. Sonia and myself, we are so happy to have you here. And I'm sure that we could spend an extra happy hour with you. And
I hope it is the start of many more conversations, and that you guys will come to Africa.
So that's the next step. What I see is that your conversation and your input builds up with the previous one we had with Deepa and Thomas, and things are getting accumulated in terms of knowledge. And next, Design Open Happy will be someone who I'm sure his voice will come in resonance with yours. His name is Srini Srinivasan, and he's the president of World Design Organization. And Srini is based out of the Silicon Valley, but he has also a design company in Ahmedabad in India. And before COVID, he used to go every month from the Valley to India to China. And he has also this traveling bug like you and me and Sonia, we have, and many of us. And COVID pushed us in some locations. So Srini will share with us some of the insights that he's busy with as an entrepreneur, and also as the president of World Design Organization, which is one of the major organization evangelizing design on the planet. So I'm looking forward to continue this conversation with Sonia and Srini, and I'll suggest all the attendees to spread the word about Design Open Happy. They can watch the previous conversations on designopen.in/happy. So Parminder, yours will be online in few days, and we'll ping you the link so you can share that with the planet. And the best to all your talks. I've seen that you have been quite busy with the farmers community in Africa these last few days, and enjoy the conversations, and let's push this transdisciplinary conversations. Thanks, Parminder, and Sonia, the closing word to you.
Thank you so much, Sonia, and both of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And what I want to say is actually one thing we've noticed as a trend across the Design Opens is the quality of our participants is very, very high. And we feel we wish we could hang on to all of you and connect someplace. We're still figuring it out, but we figured that Facebook may be one such place where we form a community and we keep meeting and get to know each other better, and we address more and more of these questions and get fantastic insights. So I look forward to seeing you all back, and thank you, Parminder, once again.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you, Alok. Thank you, the team. And I really encourage everyone to listen and join your programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Parminder. Thank you, the team. And for all those of you who raise questions, we'll follow up that and we'll share the questions with Parminder, and I'm sure we'll find a way to continue the conversation. So see you on Facebook, see you on LinkedIn, and in few months, hopefully see you at the Design Barn in Bangalore.
Yes, yes.
Have a good end of afternoon in London. Have a good evening in Bangalore. In Africa, have a good end of day. And have a nice day in the States and in Americas. Enjoy your happy hours. Thanks, Parminder. Thanks, Sonia. Thanks, team.
Thank you.